Hi, I'm Professor Malloy, and welcome back to this edition of Georgetown Startup Interns. Today's session is going to focus on informational interviews. So what exactly is an informational interview? An informational interview is your recipe for getting the recipe for the life you want. What we're going to teach you how to do today is how to talk to people and reach out to folks to build relationships with individuals who have the career that you may or may not want, so that you can learn from their professional experiences. How did they get to where they are in the world, and better understand different career paths and opportunities you may want to explore in your internship this semester, as well as throughout the entire arc of your professional career. It's one of the best ways to learn more about a new company, a new industry, to create more professional connections, and to genuinely just be curious about how other individuals who you view as successful got to where they are in the world, so that you might be able to follow in their footsteps. I'm going to go through a list of do's and don'ts for setting up informational interviews, provide an example email outreach script you can send to folks to schedule an informational interview, and then run through a great series of questions that you can put on the agenda to ask to the individuals that you do informational interviews with. So starting with the do's and the don'ts. First and foremost, you do want to be respectful of other people's times. You are almost always going to be reaching out to somebody above you who's kind of higher up on the totem pole, and so asking for a 2-hour informational interview isn't really fair. I find that asking for 15, 20, or even 30 minutes of their time, totally reasonable, especially if you're willing to accommodate their schedule and availability, and you don't want to monopolize the interview by only talking about yourself. If anything, you want to talk as little as possible so you can listen and learn from them. And one of the best ways to do that is to prepare in advance and to have your 30-second elevator pitch well honed and crafted, so that within the first minute of meeting in person or over the phone or Zoom, given today's climate, you're able to tell them who you are, what you're good at, what you want to get better at, and what career paths you're considering exploring. You don't want to show up and just wing it. If you haven't prepared anything, if you haven't done any research on who the individual is, where they work, what job title they have now, what previous job titles they've had, what they majored on in school, you won't be nearly as effective or able to capitalize on the opportunity. You also always want to follow up with a thank you note. Ideally, it's a handwritten note that you can mail. An email will do as well, but make sure that you are kind of closing the loop afterwards to reiterate how much you appreciate their time and attention to help nurture and guide you along your career path. And make sure too that you're not asking for a favor in the thank you note. You don't want to be pushy or demanding. You want to genuinely and authentically express your gratitude for this professional helping you in your career. So a few informational interview pro tips here. First and foremost, use flattery. Feel free to stroke the other person's ego a little bit, to tell them that you think they're an expert in their field, that you really look up to them, that you want to be like them when you grow up, and that you're so curious about how they were able to build such a successful career. That will create a sense of reciprocity and kind of willingness for the other person to take the time out of their day to meet with you for a coffee chat. In a pre-COVID world, it'd be great to meet in person, to go to the local Starbucks or Pete's and say, hey, I'll buy you a cup of coffee, would love to chat. Now that everything's virtual, most of these things are going to happen over Zoom. So the good news is you save maybe $5 or $10 on buying drinks for you and the other person. But if you are in person, it's polite to always offer to pay. They may not even let you, but for the cost of a latte, you're going to get a ton of wisdom and experience and guidance from this individual. So it's definitely a great investment. And if you do have a resume you can send them when reaching out for the informational interview, or a link to your LinkedIn profile, it helps them understand your background, where you are in your journey, and then you can kind of paint the picture of where you want to go and what you want to learn from them and their experiences. So one thing I want to highlight here and discourage you, I don't want you to ask people to pick their brain. Like, nobody actually wants their brain picked. You want your head cut open and somebody just poking around in there. Not a great way to ask for it, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. So I've got a great kind of response here that I encourage other people to do. if people ask them to pick their brains. And it's basically saying, hey, let's like hone in, be super specific. Tell me what you want to talk about. What are the 1 or 2 burning questions you have? And then I'll do my best to answer via email if I can, or be willing to set up a meeting if I think there's more that we can dive in there. But I just want to, again, discourage you against saying, hey, I just want to pick your brain. Like, no, like think through, what do you actually want to learn? What are you hoping to get out of it? You know, start with the end in mind. Like at the end of a 20-minute conversation with somebody, if you had learned X, Y, or Z, that would be a great conversation. Tell them that on the front end, so you guys both know what the desired outcome or goal of the meeting is. And so here's a simple email template for landing your informational interviews. You know, starts off with, first and foremost, putting the name of somebody else that is a mutual connection in the email. Great way to get the email opened. And in general, when you're sending emails, you want to increase the open rate. So by citing somebody that gives you some social proof, and one of the ways you get these recommendations is by, at the end of each of your informational interviews, you want to ask the person you just talked to, hey, who else do you know that I should talk to? You know, are there other folks in your organization or at other organizations that might have complementary skill sets or backgrounds or experiences that could also help me in my journey? You know, so again, you can kind of read through the email here. Basically says, hey, I'm looking to explore this type of opportunities. I know you're really experienced it. Somebody I met with last week said you would be a phenomenal source of information, really a wisdom and expert in your field. I'm politely asking for a brief amount of your time, offer to buy the cup of coffee if you're going to meet in person, or share your phone number or Zoom link. And then again, in the signature, thanks. And I include a LinkedIn link to your profile so that they can look you up and learn a little bit more about who you are and what you've done so far in your career. So there's kind of a cyclical process that comes with informational interviews. First, you want to identify people to interview. You need to reach out to them and request the interviews. Obviously, not everybody's going to respond, and everybody who does respond, they're not all going to say yes. So you want to have kind of a sales funnel of, you know, people you're interested in. You know, maybe you're interested in 10 different folks you reach out to with the hopes of getting 5 of them to respond, and then 3 of them actually schedule interviews with you. You definitely want to prepare questions and have your elevator pitch ready to go. Conduct the interview, and then at the end, always send a thank you note to anybody who graciously shares their time with you. All right, so let's dive into now what are some great questions. And again, you'll have access to all of these slides, so you can feel free to copy, paste, paraphrase, rearrange them in the order you want. But I want to touch on some key principles here, the types of questions you want to ask. So starting off really simply, you know, how did you get here? What's your origin story? You know, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? Sometimes it's a clear path that people went on. Sometimes it's all over the place, you know. And then you also want to understand, how long have they been with this organization? How long have they been in this industry? If they switched industries in their career, maybe ask about, you know, hey, what prompted you to switch from the you know, telecommunications industry to healthcare? Oh, okay. Another great question to ask is, and these last 2 about the organization are specifically for informational interviews with employees at the company at which you're interning. So you want to know, hey, who in the organization gets shit done, or who in the organization slows things down with bureaucracy? You want to try to understand how information flows throughout your organization, as well as how do decisions get made. Ultimately, you want to help streamline and make the decision-making process more efficient and be able to build rapport and relationships with key stakeholders at your organization who can help you be successful and get the work that you're working on pushed through any bureaucratic red tape. So some additional questions. I think the first one here is really important. Like, what else do you wish you knew before you started out in this industry? Like, I'm getting ready to get my feet wet into this industry. I've got my first internship working at this type of a company. What do you know now that would have been super helpful to know when you were 20 years old? And also, what do you love about the industry? Why is this the type of industry that you work in? And, you know, I think it's also really helpful to understand the types of experience that can help people level up in their career, and perhaps different experiences that will be useful for you to acquire skills and career capital that can make you more attractive for future full-time job opportunities. And as you're exploring different industries or fields or even roles, I think it's really helpful to ask, like, what's an average day of work like? What types of meetings are you in? Who are you interacting with? Are you customer facing? Are you internally facing? Do you have meetings with like the boss and the boss's boss? Do you manage other people? What's the kind of ebb and flow of a typical day or week at your current position? Next, you can ask, hey, what's the best way to get my foot in the door? How do you recommend I get connected with folks in this industry or at this company? I think it's also important to ask about how does work impact your life outside of the office? If you are a ER surgeon, probably on call a lot, you sleep strange hours, it's very different than a government employee who works 8:30 to 4:30 and goes home at 4:31 every day. So kind of understanding how many hours a week are you working? Are you able to kind of shut down, log off, and go enjoy life outside of the office? Or is there kind of this constant nagging in the back of your head that, oh, I got to do more work, I got to, get back to my computer and log back in after the kids go to bed? And last but not least, I always recommend you ask for referrals by simply saying, who do you know that I should know? Now that we've had this great conversation, you understand where I want to go. Maybe you play back a little bit of what you heard and learn from them, and then ask for additional introductions to people who could be useful for your next informational interview. And again, you always want to follow up with a handwritten thank you note or at least an email afterwards. And I encourage you to stay in touch, and every 3 to 6 months, email these people. Have a list of kind of part-time mentors, advisors, folks that are way smarter than you, that are way further along in your career, that have at least been willing to invest 20 or 30 minutes to helping you. That means they're probably pretty likely that if in 3 to 6 months you have another question, or you're thinking about a different role, or you want to weigh 2 different job opportunities you have for after college, then perhaps they can be somebody who will help you kind of weigh the pros and cons and share their unique perspective on any future challenges you may face. So your assignment now is to think of at least 3 people who you can conduct an informational interview with to prepare you for your internship. I recommend at least one of these people be in the organization you're going to be working with, and at least one person be completely external. And if you need a place to start, head on over to LinkedIn, do some searching for people who have the job title you aspire to have later in your career, who work at companies you're interested in working at later in your career. And bonus points if you, not necessarily bonus points, but maybe I'll frame it this way. You're more likely to get this person to accept and schedule an informational interview with you if they're also a Georgetown alum. You can reach out and say, hey, I'm a Georgetown student working through a Georgetown Startup Internship program. I'd love to, schedule 20 or 30 minutes with you to learn from, another Georgetown alum about how you got to where you are in your career, because I'm interested in following a similar career path. And then the bonus points are, if you sign at Hoya Saxa, almost anybody who went to Georgetown will do whatever you're asked for.